On my birthday, Corin Duan shared a picture featuring himself and his female secretary, both sporting matching rings. Believing that work colleagues could also be life partners, I commented, "A perfect match." Corin responded angrily, accusing me of being unreasonable and not understanding humor. Before ending the call, he gently comforted his distressed secretary. In the past, I would have reacted by rushing over in a panic, creating a scene that others might mock. However, this time I remained calm and unaffected. When Corin got home, I was preparing breakfast. It had been my birthday the day before, and Corin had promised to return and celebrate with me. I had left work early and set a full table with various dishes, but by midnight, he still hadn't arrived. Without that posted photo, I might have continued waiting foolishly. As I placed the sandwiches on the table, Corin demanded, "Where's mine?" Surprised, I responded, "Didn't you eat?" Assuming Christine had made his breakfast, I hadn't prepared an extra portion. He glanced at my plate and contemptuously remarked, "This is garbage, not worth eating." In the past, such a comment would have made me eager to argue, but now I simply nodded, "Yeah, you don't like it anyway." He stiffened and threw a paper bag at me. "I bought you some lipstick." Whenever we quarreled, he would offer small gifts as peace offerings, knowing I couldn't stay upset for long and would take the chance to reconcile. I didn't look up and responded dismissively, "Thanks." Not getting the reaction he wanted, he snorted and headed to the bathroom, complaining, "What are you wearing? You're too old for pink. Do you think you're Chris's age?" I paused, wondering if he had forgotten that Christine and I were the same age. While clearing the table, Corin's phone, left on the surface, received a message from cute Chris. "Corin, thank you for being with me yesterday. I feel much better." I glanced at the message and looked away, but Corin suddenly grabbed me, slamming me against the wall with a muffled groan. He yelled furiously, "Hannah, who gave you permission to look at my phone?" I turned pale, clutching my shoulder. It felt dislocated. After replying to the message, Corin noticed my face was drenched in cold sweat and frowned. It was just a minor bump, no need to overreact. Before I could respond, he impatiently added, Fine, I'm sorry. I'll drive you to work later, okay?" Given my injury, I naturally didn't decline his offer. Once inside the car, I noticed a small cat charm hanging in front. Corin seemed uneasy and remarked, "Chris liked it and insisted on hanging it." I replied indifferently, "Oh, it's nice." His expression turned strange. "Your lucky charm was too tacky, so I removed it." I stared at him blankly. If he wanted to change it, why explain it to me? Suddenly, I remembered that the charm was something I had obtained after a 2-hour mountain hike. Despite his disapproval, I left it in the car. If I were the old me, I might have immediately discarded Christine's things. But now, I no longer cared about Corin, so there was no point in competing with her. "Let's go. We're going to be late," he urged, finally starting the car. As we crossed the high bridge, I realized we were on the wrong route. "This road leads to Starlight Tower," I pointed out. He clicked his tongue. "Can you stop nagging while I'm driving?" I calmly stated, "My office is currently at the Sanyo building." He grew irritated. "Why didn't you say so earlier? I told you, but you didn't remember." Upon exiting the ramp, his phone rang with Christine's favorite ringtone, Pikachu. She mentioned her cat was sick and needed to see a vet. Corin pulled over and told me to get out. "Since we're already off route, you can find your own way to work." He then sped away. During the morning rush, I couldn't secure a cab and stood outside in the freezing cold for over an hour, shivering uncontrollably. Eventually, I took the day off and visited the orthopedic clinic. That evening, Corin came home, checked the kitchen, and asked, "Where's the late-night snack?" Before returning home, he had sent me a message. After all these years together, whenever he came home late, I always prepared a late-night snack for him without needing a reminder. I replied dismissively, "I didn't check my phone." Corin paused briefly before handing me a box. "Didn't you say you wanted to buy a necklace last time? Here." I turned away from the TV and saw the familiar design. Politely, I said, "Thank you, but I've lost interest in wearing necklaces lately." Earlier that day, Christine had posted a photo wearing that exact necklace, complaining that the design was too outdated for her taste. Corin leaned in, attempting to place the necklace around my neck. Try it on anyway. As his hand approached, it still felt warm from Christine's neck. Instinctively, I reached out to block him, and the delicate necklace broke in an instant. Corin frowned. "Are you still upset about having to go to work alone?" "I'm not angry," I replied. He sneered. "Don't pretend you're not. I know you too well. You've always been petty, unlike Chris, who's so generous. I grew up reading people's expressions. You're sensitive by nature." Whenever we argued, Corin would mock me for being petty. When I broke down and cried hysterically, he would calmly watch from the sidelines, amused. But this time, he was going to be disappointed. I simply turned away, indifferent. "You're right." After watching TV for a while longer, I got up to gather my things and leave. Corin taunted, "What, running away from home again?" I calmly looked back. "I'm going to work overtime." His expression froze awkwardly, as if he had more to say, but I had already opened the door. I spent the night playing a murder mystery game with my best friend Betty. Corin called, but I didn't answer. Betty was shocked. "You're not picking up your husband's call." Everyone knew I loved Corin deeply. I would always answer his calls and texts immediately, but that night, I didn't feel like it at all. Instead, I dragged Betty to a bar. When I returned home, the sun was just beginning to rise. I went straight to the guest room to wash up. I had just fallen asleep when a loud bang woke me up. "You still know how to come back," Corin remarked sarcastically. Ignoring his tone, I turned over and went back to sleep. In the past, I would always cater to him if he wanted to talk and stay distant when he was annoyed. I was always the one seeking his attention. Now that I didn't respond, Corin stood there for a moment before abruptly slamming the door and storming out. Without any disturbance, I slept soundly. When I woke up, the house was empty, and I felt a sense of relief. I leisurely prepared lunch for myself, enjoyed it, and then went to meet the divorce lawyer that Betty had recommended. Upon arriving at the law firm, I saw a video posted by Corin's good friend Pablo. It was from his birthday party. In the middle of the video, Corin appeared with Christine sitting on his lap. Before the video could finish, it was deleted, and Corin immediately called. "Honey, don't misunderstand. Chris just lost her balance, and I helped her up," I replied, confused. "I didn't misunderstand." "Then don't be mad. On Pablo's birthday, you were working, so I was even more puzzled. Why would I be mad?" Corin was momentarily speechless. After a long silence, he finally said, "I'll pick you up tonight and we'll go out for dinner." I was about to decline when I heard the dial tone. He had already hung up. Corin came to pick me up, and we went straight to a Japanese restaurant. As soon as we entered the lobby, the manager bypassed me and respectfully addressed Corin behind me. "Mr. Duan, you're here. Mrs. Duan is already waiting in the Sakura room." Corin's face changed instantly. Just as he was about to speak, Christine walked out, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. She ran over affectionately. "Corin, darling Tilda." Then, seemingly noticing me for the first time, she said, "Oh, Sister Hannah, you're here too." "You haven't been to this place before, right? Corin loves their sea urchin salad." The lobby manager, sensing the tension, discreetly left. I smiled faintly. What a coincidence. Corin's expression shifted slightly as he walked over to take my hand, but I turned away. "Let's go. I'm hungry." Throughout the meal, Corin remained distracted, frequently glancing at me, offering dishes, and making introductions. I sometimes replied with brief, automatic phrases, but eventually I let out a sigh and said, "Just concentrate on eating." Halfway through our meal, the restaurant owner approached to strike up a conversation. It dawned on me that the establishment was owned by Marco, one of Corin's buddies. Marco apologized, explaining that the waiter was new and had confused someone. I recognized this as his way of defending Corin, whose friends were always ready to support him. I gave a slight smile and responded, "It's okay. Thanks for coming all this way." Noticing that I wasn't making a fuss, Marco seemed taken aback. After exchanging a few more casual remarks, he left. Once I finished eating, I headed to the restroom. Upon returning, I saw Corin holding a visibly intoxicated Christine with a look of tenderness. It reminded me of last year at a work event when I also got drunk. My colleague had called Corin using my phone, but he declined to come and fetch me. After my colleague dropped me off at home, I kept entering the wrong passcode and ended up spending the night in the hallway during the early winter. It wasn't until the next morning that I discovered Corin had been at home the entire time. I didn't want to let you in. I wanted you to learn a lesson. What kind of behavior is it for a woman to drink outside? Reflecting on this, I returned to the private room, grabbed my bag, and left. As soon as I arrived home, Corin called, "Hannah, are you out of your mind? You left without saying anything. Do you know how long I waited for you?" I replied calmly, "Corin, let's get a divorce." This was my second proposal for a divorce. The first was on our wedding anniversary last year. On that day, Corin had taken Christine to the aquarium, leading to a massive fight where he shoved me so hard that I miscarried. I thought divorce might scare him, but he surprisingly agreed without hesitation. I cried, desperately asking him to forgive my impulsive words, but this time, I was genuinely determined to leave. Corin froze. After a moment, he let out a chilly laugh. "You're trying this again? Fine, I'll be right back. Let's see what other tricks you have." About 30 minutes later, he came home. I handed him the divorce papers I had prepared, but he recoiled, letting the papers slip to the floor. "Heh, you're really going all out with this." He gave me a long, intense stare. "This game is getting old." I insisted. "This time it's serious." He sneered dismissively. "Hannah, I know you too well. If you're going to act difficult, at least think it through. Do you even have any sense? Stop pretending to be young. You're insane." With that, he turned and left. In the following days, Corin didn't return home, and I was perfectly fine with that. Then Marco called in a panic, saying Corin had been in a car accident and I needed to go to the hospital. I replied calmly, "I'm at work and can't leave. If he truly needs someone, ask Christine. He doesn't want to see me anyway. He'd probably be happier with Christine there." However, when I got off work, the person who was supposedly in the hospital was sitting at home unharmed, though he looked displeased. Upon seeing me, he washed some fruit and offered it to me. From then on, every morning he made me breakfast and drove me to and from work with a sour expression. I couldn't endure it any longer. "If you don't enjoy eating with me, don't force it. You're spoiling my appetite too." He paused, his face growing even darker, and responded stiffly, "I'm not forcing myself." Then he looked down to update his social media, likely waiting for me to post something about his kindness as before. But I didn't post anything and even blocked him. The divorce papers remained on the coffee table, but Corin acted as if he couldn't see them. I didn't press the issue. My lawyer advised patience at this stage. Over the weekend, I went with Betty to welcome a friend back to town. As soon as I entered the designated venue, a surprised voice called out, "Wife, are you here to see me?" My presence visibly delighted Corin. He smiled and wrapped his arm around me. "Everyone's here. Let's say hello and then go home." Before I could object, he had already led me to the private room. The door opened and I could hear voices inside. Pablo and Marco were talking to Christine, referring to her as little sister-in-law. The last time I heard that was when Pablo had asked Corin to take little sister-in-law to his winery the previous year. On our way back, I joked, "Being called little sister-in-law makes me feel so much younger." Corin, however, snapped irritably, "How annoying! How old are you? Do you have any sense? Stop pretending to be young, you're crazy." It turned out they weren't even talking about me. Corin glanced at me nervously. "They're just joking with the title, that's all." I was replying to a message and casually said, "It's just a title. They can call whoever they want, whatever they like." Seeing him holding me as we walked in, the others had varied expressions, and Pablo quickly stood up. "Sister-in-law, I forgot to invite you to my birthday party last time. You said you'd take care of that." I smiled and responded politely before Corin pulled me down to sit. Christine, who had initially seemed annoyed, now giggled sweetly. Hanny, Corin mentioned you don't enjoy these kinds of gatherings. I almost believed it, thinking you just didn't want to come. In the past, I had wanted to integrate into Corin's life, but he rarely took me to events with his friends, saying I wasn't familiar with them and that everyone would feel awkward with me around. Now, with the smoky and tense atmosphere in the private room, I really didn't want to stay. The others began encouraging us to share a traditional toast, and Christine eagerly handed me a glass. As she toasted, I noticed the watch and ring she was wearing, designs that were all too familiar because Corin had them too. Betty sent me a message. I'm here. My eyes lit up, and I stood up, pulling Christine's hand amidst the surprised looks. I sat Christine next to Corin, ignoring his panicked expression, handed them both a glass of wine, and intertwined their hands. With a satisfied smile, like an elder witnessing a wedding, I said, "You two drink the toast and stay together forever, living a happy life." When they didn't respond, I quickly added, "Don't worry, I won't break you up. I also hope lovers stay together." The room went silent, everyone staring at us in shock. I urged them, "Come on, drink." Then I left the private room with light steps. Hanny! Corin chased after me, his face frantic and lips trembling. "Christine and I aren't what you think." I looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" he stammered, struggling to explain. "There's nothing between us. Really, you have to believe me." He lifted his hand, removed the watch, and threw it to the ground, then took off the ring, his fingers raw from rubbing. "These were just for fun. They mean nothing." "Look, I threw them away." He desperately clung to my arm, just as I had when I saw him taking Christine to the gynecologist. Back then, I had held on to him tightly, thinking I could grasp his heart that way. But he had frowned in disgust, pushed me away, and snapped, "Can you behave yourself in public?" Now the roles were reversed, and he was the one begging in despair. I coldly pulled his hand away. "Behave yourself in public, Mr. Duan." He looked at me in disbelief as I walked further away, but he didn't dare follow. During the welcome dinner, Corin kept texting me, but I ignored every message. Eventually, he called, but I silenced my phone and tucked it into my bag. Betty asked, "Is everything okay?" I smiled calmly. "He doesn't matter. Let's not let him ruin our good mood." As I exited the private room, a figure leaned against the door wall and brightened up. "Hanny, I'll take you home." I shook my head and kept walking. "No need. I have another event with my friends." Corin followed closely, his tone pleading. "Then send me the address. I'll come pick you up." I remained silent and left. On my way out, I finally reviewed the messages he had sent earlier. Over a dozen of them initially inquired about when I would be finished so we could head home together. Later, he asked if I had any hangover remedies and mentioned that he had gone out to buy some yogurt, offering to bring it to me. Eventually, he stated he was waiting at the door and that I would see him when I exited the restaurant. After departing, Betty bid farewell, and Maxwell and I made our way back to the orphanage. That evening, Maxwell and I stayed behind at the orphanage. Corin became frantic, sending me dozens of messages and making more than 10 phone calls. I finally responded when I woke up. His voice was tense, yet careful. "Hanny, are you still not finished?" Just then, there was a knock on the door, and Maxwell called me to come for breakfast. Corin paused for a moment before speaking again, his voice strained. "Is it that man from yesterday?" I suddenly remembered he hasn't met Maxwell. "Yes," I replied. His voice quivered and his breathing quickened. "Where are you?" "I'll come get you." I responded coldly, inventing a lie. "At Betty's house." Corin paused briefly, then spoke with difficulty. "I'm right outside Betty's house. She just left." I clicked my tongue in frustration. "Are you out of your mind? Do I need to report my location to you?" He quickly tried to explain, his tone still gentle. I worry about you, Hanny. Just tell me where you are, and I'll come get you." "The orphanage," I stated firmly. He hesitated and asked where the orphanage was, but my patience had run thin, and I hung up. Somehow, he had found me. As I stepped out of the orphanage, Corin was already waiting at the entrance, his eyes cautiously observing Maxwell. Maxwell shrugged nonchalantly and headed to his car. Corin eagerly opened the passenger door for me, but I glanced at it and decided to sit in the back. On the dashboard beside the passenger seat lay a black lace camisole. Corin's pupils narrowed as he quickly discarded it from the car, stammering, "Chris borrowed my car to change clothes. We didn't do anything, Hanny." I closed my eyes to interrupt him. "Stop talking. Hanny, I opened my eyes and spoke calmly. "I genuinely feel a bit sick." His face paled immediately, and I added with satisfaction, "I ate too much and my stomach's upset. Let's go." He stood there, processing my words, unsure if I was serious, before hesitantly getting into the car and starting the engine. Once we arrived home, I went to the study to work extra hours. When I came out, Corin had already prepared 2 dishes and a soup. His cooking skills surpassed mine. In the past, what I most looked forward to was him preparing a meal for my birthday. But that never happened. Whenever I mentioned it, he would impatiently retort, "You're an orphan, not some spoiled princess. Why do you need someone to cater to you? So pretentious. If you want to eat, cook for yourself. It's not like you can't take care of yourself." However, Christine often shared photos of the lovingly made bento boxes. Once he left a bento on the table, and thinking it was for me, I took it. That night, when we returned home, he grabbed a handful of the leftover bento and shoved it into my mouth. "You really want to eat my cooking? Eat it. You look like a beggar. Eat, eat, eat. Why don't you just choke on it?" Before he got home, I saw Christine's post on social media. "Someone made me a bento with love, but it was stolen. So sad." It was then I realized the bento was intended for Christine. Because of me, Christine was upset, and now he was punishing me for upsetting her. At that moment, I was left with food smeared across my face and hair. I cried while washing it off. When I emerged, Corin looked at me expectantly. "Hanny, I made your favorite sweet and sour ribs and seafood soup." I walked to the table, and he eagerly handed me the chopsticks. I picked up a rib piece and threw it to the floor, scoffing. "Trying to feed a beggar? Eat it yourself." He stared at me in shock, seemingly unable to comprehend my actions. Then, I took the pot of soup and poured it over his head. "What is this? It smells awful." The scalding soup made his face turn red, but he remained silent. After that, my food delivery arrived. I took it back to the study to eat, ignoring Corin as he cleaned up the mess. Soon after, Corin knocked on the door. "Hanny, He was cut off by the sound of Pikachu's ringtone. Christine was crying on the other end, saying something. After ending the call, Corin explained through the door, "Hanny, please wait for me at home. Mo, Christine is dealing with a client, and it's related to company business. I need to go resolve it. I'll clean up the mess on the floor when I get back, and I'll bring you your favorite cheesecake," I replied perfunctorily, putting on my headphones and listening to Betty on the other end. After waiting a long time without any further response, Corin finally left in a hurry, slamming the door behind him. After confirming my travel plans with Betty, I grabbed my packed luggage and headed straight to the airport, sending Corin a message along the way. "The divorce agreement is on the coffee table. Please sign it as soon as possible." After nearly a 10-hour flight, I landed and received a few texts. One from a colleague. "Your husband came to the office looking for you. Didn't you tell him you took leave?" Another from Maxwell. "Corin came to find me, but I wasn't home. He probably misunderstood something." Just as I finished reading the messages, the orphanage called to inform me that Corin had searched the entire place yesterday looking for me. Checking the call log, Corin had made over 20 calls. I didn't return them. Instead, I switched to a local SIM card and enjoyed a month of carefree fun. Here, I was just myself, surrounded by friends and beautiful scenery. I didn't have to worry about a man not coming home at night, didn't have to be heartbroken over his cold words, and didn't have to lose myself to please him. I experienced an unprecedented sense of ease and happiness. A month later, I returned home to find the divorce agreement still untouched on the coffee table. I unpacked my luggage, deleted Corin's fingerprints from the door lock, and changed the password. Even before returning, my application for further studies had been approved, and I was scheduled to leave for the UK in 3 months. Betty and Maxwell booked a restaurant to celebrate with me. However, as soon as I arrived at the restaurant's parking lot, I ran into Corin and Christine, who were also there for dinner. When I got home, I reviewed Corin's activities over the past month. After failing to find me, his social media became quite active. One day, he posted a picture of the tie I had bought for him, saying it could tie a man's heart. The next day, he shared a photo of us from when we were dating, reminiscing about the promises we made. The following day, he posted a picture of a dish he cooked, stating his wife loved his culinary skills. Anyone unaware of the situation might genuinely believe he was a loving husband who adored his family. Upon seeing me, his face darkened, and he approached with long strides. I swiftly avoided his attempt to grab my hand by moving behind Maxwell. Before Corin could say anything, Christine screamed, her face full of indignation. "Hanny, you really are a fickle woman. You're not even divorced yet, and you're already flirting with other men, going in and out with your lover." Corin was already glaring at us, and Christine's words infuriated him. He swung his fist in rage. "How dare you flirt with my wife, you bastard!" I couldn't let him hurt my friend, so I quickly swung my bag at him. It landed heavily on his face, and he looked at me in disbelief. I responded coldly, "Get lost." Corin's eyes immediately turned red, his face filled with grievance and accusation. "Wife, are you hitting me for another man?" I sneered. "Yes. Is there a problem?" He stood there dazed, clearly unable to comprehend why the woman who once cared for him the most, who loved him more than herself, was now humiliating him for someone else. Christine walked over, linking her arm with Corin's, casting a triumphant glance at me. She gently addressed Corin, saying, "Corin, let's leave." However, she realized he didn't value her. But before she could continue, Corin abruptly pushed her aside, his gaze fixed firmly on her. "Wife, I recognize my past mistakes. Please forgive me and return home. I'll prepare meals for you every day, making whatever you desire." She couldn't suppress a sarcastic laugh. Previously, his sincere pleas would have tugged at her heart, and she would have been quick to forgive. But now, where did he find such boldness? Did he truly believe that a mere gesture would make her rush back like a pet? "Corin, if you don't want me to pursue legal action, please expedite the divorce papers. I'm certain you wouldn't want this minor issue to tarnish your reputation." With that, she escorted Maxwell and Betty into the restaurant. Corin entered with a stern expression, and Christine hurried after him but avoided taking his hand again. They moved into a nearby private room, but the walls didn't muffle the noise. As Betty raised her glass to toast her academic success, the sound of shattering glass erupted next door. Before she could react, Corin shouted, "Get out! Don't touch me!" The waiter checked the area, but no one responded. Soon after, hurried footsteps faded away, and within 10 minutes, complete silence enveloped the adjacent room. That evening, Corin couldn't get inside and pounded on the door violently, disregarding his reputation. She called security and the police, which finally quieted the situation outside. However, since the divorce papers hadn't arrived, she had her lawyer initiate legal proceedings. 3 months later, she traveled to the UK for a training program at the company's main office. A week into her stay, she noticed Corin at her residence, looking worn out. It was drizzling, yet he stood there without an umbrella, his hair and clothes drenched. Some colleagues felt sorry for him and inquired about what to do. She calmly advised them not to get involved, stating that anyone who chose to help would be responsible for him, as she wanted no connection. For the following week, Corin was seen daily in the rain until his face flushed red and he collapsed. The team leader, unable to watch any longer, finally arranged for him to be hospitalized. When he attempted to cover his medical bills, she intervened, contacting Corin's parents instead. The affluent couple arrived in the UK swiftly and greeted her with clear displeasure. They had never been fond of her. If Corin hadn't insisted on marrying her, how could someone without a background or significant qualifications marry into their wealthy family? Corin and she never had a formal wedding, Only his close friends and immediate family knew they were married. It wasn't that she hadn't objected, but Corin had held her tightly, explaining, "My parents can't accept it right now. If we have a wedding, they'll be angry and it will worsen their view of you." She had been entirely focused on him, believing he was considering her feelings. "And without a ring," Corin paused before adding, "once my parents approve and we have the wedding, I'll personally place a ring on your finger. It will mean more than any ring I could buy now." She trusted him completely. It wasn't until she saw him and Christine wearing matching rings that she realized her naivety. Mrs. Duan approached and held her hand. "Hanny, I understand you've suffered over the past few years. Now that Corin has improved, please forgive him." Her eyes still showed disdain and dissatisfaction, but she humbled herself to convince her, likely to protect their beloved son. She chuckled softly, pretending to agree. Mr. and Mrs. Duan then left the hospital satisfied. Alone in the room, Corin was already awake, looking at her with hopeful eyes. "When you're well, come back home. Don't cause me more trouble here." She began to walk away, but heard a thud as Corin fell from the bed. "Hanny!" His eyes were red, his face pale, his voice pleading. "I know I've made mistakes. Can you forgive me? I've deleted Christine's contact and she's no longer my employee. Could you?" She cut him off coldly. "It's unnecessary. I already knew about this." On my third day in the UK, Betty sent me a video of Christine publicly accusing Corin of harassment using his position, along with ample evidence. The Duan family filed a lawsuit against Christine for defamation and extortion. She's already been detained. These two vile people are indeed a perfect match. She looked at him indifferently, feeling nauseous. "Corin, regardless of Christine, you alone disgust me." He awkwardly sat up, leaning against the bed, his voice shaky. "Hanny, I know you think I loved Christine, but I didn't." "Fine. If you don't believe me, I'll prove it." He grabbed a fruit knife from the bedside table and stabbed himself. Blood rapidly spread. "Hanny, I'm cutting out my heart. To show you." His pale face turned ghostly white, sweat dripping like pearls onto the floor. He struggled to breathe, slowly crawling toward her, clutching her ankle. "Hanny, please have mercy on me. Didn't you love me? Hanny, look, I've proven it." She stared at him coldly. "Corin, it's a pity you didn't pursue acting. Your performance has even fooled yourself, hasn't it?" Blood continued to flow as she called urgently for the doctors. Amid the chaos, Mr. and Mrs. Duan rushed back, too concerned for their son to blame her. Corin was saved, but weakly warned his parents, "If you bully Hanny, I'll stab myself again." She found this absurd and left the hospital. Mrs. Duan called multiple times, urging her to visit Corin, but she firmly declined. A few days later, Corin appeared outside her building in a hospital gown. Seeing her, he stumbled after her. "Hanny!" She walked on, pretending not to see him. He followed into the elevator, but she exited when the doors closed. The next day, he returned again. She called Mrs. Duan, who hurried to take him away. After 6 months of training, she returned home and was promoted to department manager. Betty and Maxwell prepared a large cake to celebrate at her house. Just as she was cutting the cake, the doorbell rang. Probably a delivery, she thought, and went to open the door, only to find Corin standing there. He had lost much weight, and upon seeing her, he forced a smile. "Hanny, I heard you got promoted. I'm here to congratulate you." Maxwell stepped forward, placing an arm around her shoulder. "Who is it?" Corin's face drained of color, his voice seemingly lost. After a long pause, he finally spoke hoarsely. "Can I come in to celebrate with you?" Maxwell kindly stepped aside. "Of course, Mr. Duan. Please come in." Corin's movements were shaky as he removed his shoes, but couldn't locate his usual slippers. Maxwell handed him disposable ones. "Sorry, we don't have extra slippers." Corin didn't stay long and left in a daze. Shortly after, he called her. "Hanny, I know there's nothing between you and Maxwell. You're just angry with me. Asterisk, cough, cough, asterisk." The call abruptly ended with a series of beeps, leaving her puzzled but not overly concerned. About 30 minutes later, another call came through. "Hello, this is the city's third hospital. Are you related to Mr. Corin? He's been in a car accident and is undergoing emergency treatment. Please come immediately." The chaotic sounds of the emergency room reminded her of the previous year when Corin had left her on the ground to accompany Christine to the aquarium. After he left, she had severe abdominal pain, and the floor was soaked in blood. While waiting for an ambulance, she had called him, tearfully pleading for him to return. But he had impatiently replied, "What can I do if I go back? I'm not a doctor. Why are you so dramatic? Stop crying. Don't bother me." When she tried calling again, the phone was turned off. After her surgery, she saw Christine's post, a photo of Christine and Corin by the jellyfish tank, their faces close together. As the memory resurfaced, the doctor on the other end asked again. She smiled. "Sorry, you've got the wrong number. I don't know the person you're referring to." After a protracted 10-month divorce battle, it finally concluded. Corin, now a double amputee in a wheelchair, looked at her as if she were a treasure. But she was busy celebrating with Betty, embracing her and cheering. Not only had she freed herself from Corin, but she had also acquired substantial wealth. 5 years later, after being promoted to an executive role at the company's headquarters, she was traveling abroad. Betty called, "Hanny, Corin committed suicide this morning." She checked the news and saw the Duan Group's obituary. After enduring long-term depression and physical pain, he passed away. On social media, a trending video showed Christine, freshly released from prison, live streaming and gloating, "The bastard finally died, ha ha ha!" Her laughter was cut short as she was struck and thrown across the street, her phone smashing to the ground. She turned off her phone and gazed at the Skogafoss waterfall before her, feeling an overwhelming sense of tranquility. Those people no longer had any connection to her.